All right, good afternoon, everyone. We've got an article entitled Porn and Video Game Addiction Leading to Masculinity Crisis, says Stanford psychologist. So here we are looking at an article from a secular perspective. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, Stanford professor. It was interesting to me because I took a psychology class in high school, and this guy, the psychologist in this video was the Mr. Psychology in the videos we used to watch in class. So I know that guy. And then the study was some pretty shocking stuff in here.
Nothing Christian about this?
No, not at all.
And yet of concern to the evangelical church?
I would say so.
Yeah. All right, let's get started, Brian.
All right, so this is coming to us from independent.co.uk. Psychologist and professor emeritus at Stanford University, Philip Zimbardo, has made, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I think so.
Has made the warnings, which form a major part of his latest book, Man Disconnected. In an interview on the BBC World Service Weekend program, Zimbardo spoke about the results of his study, an in-depth look into the lives of 20,000 young men and their relationships with video games and pornography. He said, "Our focus is on young men who play video games to excess and do it in social isolation. They are alone in their room. Now, with freely available pornography, which is unique in history, they are combining playing video games and, as a break, watching an average 2 hours of pornography a week." Zimbardo says there is a crisis amongst young men, a high number of whom are experiencing a new form of addiction to excessive use of pornography and video games. Zimbardo gave, is this TED? TED. Okay. Gave a TED talk in 2011 outlining the problems facing young men's social development and academic achievement, which he puts down to excessive use of porn, video games, and the internet.
All right, so let's interrupt. So from Zimbardo, there is a problem, but that's only, David, because he has a perspective on what a man's supposed to be like.
That's true.
Right? And isn't this going to go away in our world of tolerance in which there are no correct defined roles for males and females? Each individual decides for themselves what their own role is. I mean, we're attacking it from a biblical perspective because we believe that gender is determined by God. It's not self-determined. And he obviously believes that.
Yeah, clearly.
Not necessarily about God, but that
Right.
there is a gender-specific role that each are supposed to take. But as I wonder, as we progress down this phenomenally slippery slope that we're going down, I mean, it's a record-breaking pace, how many people would even agree that it's a problem?
Yeah, I think it's hard to. I mean, when you look at the statistics, this is a male problem. You know, I'm not saying females can't have this issue, but it is overwhelmingly a male problem. I think those statistics are kind of hard to ignore, no matter how much you want to play with the idea of what a gender role is and how you can choose your own
Why
gender.
is it a problem that a guy spends 15 hours a day playing video games?
Well, he's not working, probably, and he's not communicating with real people other than maybe through a headset. So other than being a leech and being absolutely inept socially, I guess there's probably no issues.
Yes, something else to kind of caveat off of that is that I think when people are spending 15 hours a day on video games, they're basically engaging in a reality, that is not, or a hypothetical world that is not in any way related to this one. And so you get, these people that become more attached to that world than they do to the one that they're actually living in.
Right, but why is that a problem?
That's definitely a problem because then
Why?
you have people like, what was that? I was just
think
reading
as
about.
long as there are mothers, biological females who give birth to sons, there's going to be this issue because no mom in the world is going to look and say, "My son's living in my basement. He's 35. Awesome."
Practically speaking,
Because there's an innate, obviously we believe God-given expectation from a mother that her son's going to get up and do something.
yeah.
Son's going to get up and be productive. And this is not happening when you're playing video games. You're not being
I just don't know if enough leaders in America think it's a problem.
Oh, I think that's a good point.
I mean, I don't think that the president thinks it's a problem that huge portions of the entire nation do nothing all day long and collect dollars from the government? I mean, at least they're doing something.
And what's amazing about that issue, I mean, that point that you're making is that we're more concerned with things like global warming and
how about putting a new face on the $20 bill?
Yeah.
exactly.
We've got to do that. That's really important.
Yeah.
It might be. It's like the house is burning. Let's plant a tomato garden. I mean, we have to do that. I mean,
Well, the first lady is literally doing
Yeah.
that. Organic gardens. She's all about that.
Practically
Good for her.
speaking, like I think a way that it definitely impacts young men is because, you know, if you're engaging in these worlds and you're attaching yourself to them, they don't prepare you for the world, for the real world that you have to live in. You know, it's not an option for you to live in this world, and those, when you spend so much time in them and you become attached to them, you know, they don't prepare you for the real world. They don't instruct you in, you know, practical ways of being able to live out mature lives. And you see that with guys living in their basement of their mom's house for like till they're 35, 36 or something like that.
Well,
you know?
and even from a secular viewpoint, that would have the mindset of survival of the fittest. Someone who sits in a basement or sits in front of a TV screen for 15 hours a day, in a secular mindset, in a couple generations, they will completely die off. They're not going to reproduce. They're not going to sustain life because they're not doing the things that nature, as they would call it, would intend.
I was reading this thing the other day. It was about. I want to find this article, but there was these two adults had a kid, and they completely neglected the kid to the point at which the child died. And the ironic part about it was that they were spending so much time at one of those video game parlors or the internet cafes, engaging in like those simulators for, you know, and they had this virtual baby that they were taking care of more than they were taking care of their physical baby, who ended up perishing because of how connected they were to this, you know, to this completely fake reality. And so it's not, you know, I think that it kind of doesn't prepare people well, and then also kind of, especially when you talk about pornography, like this article does, it builds in these false expectations that, you know, that turn people off of the reality that we live in, you know, and I think that's very damaging in and of itself.
Right, so Zimbardo cited the example of a mother he met while conducting the study whose son does not see the problem in playing video games for up to 15 hours a day. Zimbardo said, "For me, excess is not the number of hours, it's a psychological change in mindset." Giving an example of the mindset of a gaming and pornography-addicted young man, he says, "When I'm in class, I'll wish I was playing World of Warcraft. When I'm with a girl, I'll wish I was watching pornography, because I'll never get rejected." Zimbardo claims that this relatively new phenomenon is affecting the minds of young men. Citing the research he and his team conducted for the book, he says it begins to change brain function. It begins to change the reward center of the brain. It produces a kind of excitement and addiction. What I'm saying is, boys' brains are becoming digitally rewired. He also mentioned the growing problem of a disputed phenomenon called porn-induced erectile dysfunction, or PIED. Young boys who should be viral are now having the problem in getting an erection. Love and Sex News in picture. I guess that's just an ad. Sorry. You
read
have
it
this.
well, though.
Yeah. Moving on. Bill, stop it. Right. You have this paradox. They're watching exciting videos that should be turning them on, and they can't get turned on. An article from Psychology Today, however, argues that there are no demonstrable. Man, been out of English too long. All right. Scientific links between porn consumption and erectile dysfunction. In his opinion, the solution is to accept the problem as serious. Parents must become aware of the number of hours a child is spending alone in their room playing video games and watching porn at the expense of other activities.
All right, so at what age do you let a teenager boy play video games in his bedroom?
Never.
We never did.
Okay, you never did.
As a 26-year-old, I can say I have never played a video game in my bedroom.
Okay. David, you will have a different perspective. You got 2 boys. At what age would you let them play video games alone in their bedroom?
I don't know that I would ever isolate it in the bedroom. You know, I mean, I think in the living room, you know, there's some things you can do there, but I don't know that I would ever give them that much access.
17 years old.
To dangerous things, and you know, I mean, once they get to be adults, I mean, I think there's another conversation to be had. But you could still make the argument if it's in your house, you can set the standard. So you can't prevent them at some point when they leave, but I think you can prevent them for a while.
Okay.
You know.
And I would say even the prevention is going to set the habit. I mean, even today, I mean, if Joey invited me over to play, you know, Xbox or whatever, I really don't have that much interest because I've never spent much time playing video games. And because I didn't do it growing up, I don't have much of an interest in it now. So, I mean, setting the condition for several years for them not to do it, I mean, there's going to have to be a strong outside force to push them towards wanting to do that.
And I think I would agree that the problem is formed through excess amounts of time. I wouldn't agree with him that says excess is not attached to the time, because it's not necessarily a virtual world that I'm concerned about. Sure, it's more sensational than reading a book, but you know, Ted Decker has a series. I read the first half of the trilogy, first half of one book of the trilogy, where basically the main character goes to sleep and wakes up in another world, and when he goes to sleep in that world, he wakes up in another world. And I'm thinking, what's the difference between that obsession with otherworldliness and the obsession that we're poo-pooing in video games? Now, mind you, my video game experience pretty much ceilings out at FIFA with my son. And I'm sorry about that. I know that you wish it was at least Madden, but it's not. And or MLB. But the fact is, I you know, the idea of imagination, you know, we want to be careful about this being against virtual worldliness like Narnia,
Right.
Tolkien stuff, because that is actually indicative of eternality within us. He has set olam in their hearts, Ecclesiastes 3:11. He set the world in their hearts. We're supposed to be longing for a different world. So what we've done here is have a culture that's separated godhood or godliness or sanctity from that mind for another world. That is reality that we look forward to. And so I think that, like everything else, Philippians 4:5 comes in here. Let your moderation be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. There's something specifically damaging about leaving someone unattended. You know, you shame your parents, Proverbs says, when you're left to yourself. So I don't know that video games is the culprit as much as it is what people do now when they're left to themselves.
Right, which, you know, when my girls were growing up, well, still today, I mean, you know, I never let them have TVs in their room.
Right.
Because, you know, I didn't want them, you know, if they wanted to watch TV, they could go in the living room and watch TV.
Yeah.
You know, so everybody knew what they were watching. And it just removes the temptation of, you know, I'm in my room, I can watch something and maybe get away with it.
Yeah, it's just, video games are the most entertaining thing a person can do when they have nothing else to do and they have tons of time. But before, it was a different problem.
Right. I would just argue that the difference between the book and the video game is that in the book, I still have to exercise some type of mental energy to create the imagery and the imagination, which is in line with reading the Word of God and hearing the text and trying to the best of your ability to imagine this other world that God has intended and created. Whereas the video game, I don't need to imagine anything. It has been created for me. I just sit, like going to a movie theater. I mean, one of the reasons you enjoy going to a movie sometimes is because it's very relaxing. You can just sit back and just be entertained and kind of zone out. It's much more difficult to be entertained in a book. You still have to do something diligent. You have to pay. Am I paying attention? Am I learning the characters? Do I see the storyline developing?
Sure, clearly there's much more work involved with reading, as your cute little meme put out there yesterday. On your, I mean, clearly there's much more work involved with reading, or else there'd be more people doing it. I'm with you.
Right.
I'm with you.
Exactly.
And
Sure.
I think I kind of hear what you're saying is that, you know, it's just like everything else Satan has taken and made a counterfeit. You know, we have the hope of another country, and now Satan's created another counterfeit for us, which is, well, let's talk about Zon or, you know, whatever.
It's escapism.
You know, yeah, whatever made up place we're going to talk about, and then, you know, then the next step is, well, what's the difference between that and heaven? You know?
Exactly.
What's the difference between pretending to be there and saying that I believe in a God I can't see?
Sure. I think that the sort of video game is really important. I think that is one thing, but I think probably the key factor here is that the video game has become the parent. I think that's a key factor.
And I think that one thing we didn't mention before is let's be honest, probably the larger percentage of video games being played by males involve taking someone's life in a virtual world, with some sort of weapon, and also involve enjoying the shape of the woman that are provocatively dressed. I mean, the ladies don't get on those video games if they look like the Amish, okay? And so the reality is that also has a desensitizing effect that we know about, that this now the value of life itself is diminished.
You're right. I treated this girl like she was cheap in the game, and now I'm treating her like she's cheap in my house. I get it.
Which certainly elevates my feelings of importance.
Right. Yeah, because I become a god to myself when I control my sim world.
And of course, that's Satan's whole thing.
Right.
All right, the top of the page.
He also blamed negative images of men in the American media, which show men as being slobs, undesirable, only wanting to get laid, and being inadequate in doing that. He also called...
All right, stop. That's too much of a sentence to...
I think he's absolutely right.
And that he's an unsaved man, probably. Saying it is refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, I tell kids and stuff all the time. Now, find me one television show on TV, especially of the sitcom
where mom's
variety,
an idiot,
where the father is not some bumbling moron,
right.
Or a commercial on TV where there's a family and dad's not just an idiot. I mean, it is.
Right.
It's a subliminal attack on the family.
I'll give you one, and it was introduced to me on our ski trip with when the four of us went skiing up in West Virginia. I was trying to think of his name. That roomed with me.
James Dean.
Yeah, Blue Bloods. It's a police show on CBS.
What's his name?
Right.
Magnum PI.
Yeah, Tom Selleck.
Selleck.
Tom Selleck is the father of the family, and he sits at the table. It's a Catholic family, and they're a bunch of alcoholics.
Well, they don't get drunk.
No, they don't get drunk. No,
they enjoy their
all the time.
That's the bravado 50 years ago.
Right. It is, but there are two patriarchs, one at each end of the table.
Yep, the grandfather and the father,
and they are
great grandfather.
Yeah, and they are issuing decrees and communicating guidance, and there's this respect. And when he says enough, they actually stop. I mean, it's. I don't know of another show that I can think of on the air that he's legitimately seen as the leader of the family. Is that a fair representation?
Yeah, and he often submits to his father, which was the great grandfather,
right? The next generation. I mean, it's a pretty unique thing.
Yeah,
and
I'd say so.
There's 4 generations sitting at a table, having a Sunday meal after Catholic Mass, in which they all attend.
Right, which Selleck's usually the spokesperson, but time to time he'll submit or whatever, defer to his father and let him.
But this is a major problem. I mean, I talked to a man this week in our congregation about why isn't your son working with you in the family business? I can't get him to stop playing video games. What do you mean you can't get him to stop playing video games? How does that work? Okay, I mean, what do you mean you can't? Yeah. I mean, I understand you can't get him to mow straight. I understand you can't get him to weed whack straight. I got that piece. That's not easy. But certainly I can reach and take it away from you. I mean, what are you going to do, beat me?
Yeah.
I had these images of my mom coming up the steps with a temper telling me to get outside of the house. And I was ready to put the controller down, It was forced.
Right, enough.
Yeah. And I grew up in a home, my brother enjoys video games significantly more than I do. And there were many a time growing up that my dad would go downstairs and he'd come up with cord and machine in hand, and it would be, you'll get this back when. And, I mean, it's motivation, especially with as much as those things cost nowadays.
You know what's interesting about this? I heard a discussion yesterday, and there were these experts sitting around on a podcast talking about.
Like us?
Wonder what that's like.
Not as much fun as ours.
Now we know what people say about us.
They were talking about the
Experts.
greatest scenes in movies from the time of the silent movies till now, and the big thing in the room was how one person in the movies, a director or an actor, moved the history of the movies forward. They did something great that led to the next big thing, and everybody gets credit for this. And of course, one of the things about this is Hollywood. There were a lot of Jewish folks that ran Hollywood, and during the McCarthy era, they were looking for the communists and all that kind of stuff going on. But I'm sitting here thinking, some director somewhere had to say something like, "Okay, I'll let Homer Simpson go on the air and give this view of the men in the world because it's going to make me a lot of money, and I know that this is going to be funny, it's going to be a hit." And so they put the money ahead of what was reality, because we know in the early time of last century, lots of hardworking men. I mean, they built the skyscrapers, they built the bridges, they built America, out of steel and raw hard work. And yet in the movies, what is become like the face of what our nation is supposed to be like, it was a totally different story. It wasn't, the reality wasn't lived out on the silver screen. And, it was a slippery slope, inch by inch. We gave it away. We turned around on, sleeping together. We turned around on homosexuality. We just let them take it and go with it. To where now every single television show has to have that stuff in it.
I'd be interested to see what the connection, if there's a connection between what we see in television and the fact that now it's the primarily females that are the main breadwinners in homes.
Well, I don't know that that's true yet.
No, that is not true. Statistically, that's not true.
I mean, but it's headed that direction in America.
Well, it's certainly impacted, but
no, we're not there yet.
I think that more than anything, World War II impacted that, other than the silver screen. But
right.
That's a different discussion for another day.
All right. He also called for better sex education in schools, which should focus not only on biology and safety, but also on emotions, physical contact, and romantic relationships. You see, what he's calling for is moral standards.
You like the Bible?
Right, and there can be no moral standards under a Common Core curriculum, because that would elevate something above another.
I found it interesting that this came off of a United Kingdom website,
right?
Which tells me that probably we'll get closer to this, because we're a decade behind them when it comes to degeneration and that kind of thing.
Yeah, although in technology and whatnot, in video games, I don't know that we're behind. I think we're just behind in societies.
I'm talking about in the realization of what we're doing.
Yeah. As far as embracing it and all that.
Yeah, because I don't know. You probably could find this on some American source. I mean, it is from an American institution.
Yes, right, yeah.
But I find it interesting that we got it from a United Kingdom website. And I suspect that some of these people that are drawing up the new moralities are playing this to its third and fourth order effects and seeing, whoa, hold on. I see what's about to happen here. We're about to go into extinction as a society, where we don't know who the workers are, and we don't know who the parents are, and I can see that some of these sociologists have played these to the last game, and they have seen we better identify some boundaries.
The pressing issue of male mental health is now a much more prominent concern than it once was. Last year saw the first male psychology conference at the University College of London, intended to encourage the British Psychological Society to introduce a male specialist section to sit along its female equivalent. I mean, as I understand it, we got to figure out what's the problem with males.
Yeah.
Why aren't males acting like males? What do we need to change in order to get males acting like males? This would seem to imply that we need males.
Well, in our pop media, we see a lot about women in commercials and women on television, how amazing and wonderful they are, and moms are wonderful, and yet no one talks about a crisis of motherlessness. They talk about a crisis of fatherlessness. So and yet we keep directing the attention away
How will I
from that.
learn how to be a father if I spend 15 hours a day playing video games?
Yeah, we haven't even touched the pornography piece and how that's going to just destroy marriages. I mean, before they even start.
Zimbardo believes that excessive solitary use of video games and porn is seriously stunting boys' social development. Imagine that. Imagine that watching all kinds of sexual perversion in live color would have a negative impact on an 11-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old. Imagine that.
And I think, Dave, that they probably are going to have about the same effect because they're both notional worlds absent of reality. And while they might not be the result, the plant coming up out of the ground might not be the same thing. You might see different symptoms, but the problem will be.
Yeah, well, it's the same aggressiveness, the
Yeah.
same alienation, the same want for immediate gratification, results. That I can manipulate situations. I think that they run side by side.
And I think in Christian homes, a lot of parents would be, dead set trying to do things they could to avoid pornography in the home. But they'll buy the Xbox for Christmas and they'll buy the video games for birthdays, and they'll welcome one in by being dead set against the other. But yet, it seems like even the secular world saying they're kind of affected in the same thing.
Yeah, there's secular apps like one I looked up the other day. It's called Mama Bear, and the point is mom installs this on the phone, and now she has almost remote access to what her kids are doing on the phone, so she can monitor the time, the games, the apps that are being used, the time spent on those apps. And if you're not utilizing things like Covenant Eyes or this or whatever, if you're not putting a lock on the iPhone where only you control what apps your kid downloads, then you're behind the times because they're secular organizations that are already doing
and
that.
that's the thing is, I had a Nintendo Entertainment System when I was a kid. The old gray box with the 8-bit cartridges, and I played it a little bit here and there and all that, and I had it in my room. I didn't have a lot of parents looking after it, but that was all you could do on it. You had gray cartridges that went in there, and they froze half the time anyway. But that's,
So you had to blow them.
Yeah. I threw a lot of controllers in my day, but it was a video game, and that was it. Well, if you have an Xbox 360, you've got internet, you've got movies, you've got television, you've got everything you could ever imagine in that room, and I don't have to leave. I've got everything barring food and drink right there in front of me, where I don't have to go anywhere, and I can get to anywhere in the world on that internet.
And that's what the parents don't understand, David. They're ignorant towards the reality that in 1 second they can have that minimized and they can be watching porn, and your hand can be on the door handle, and they can have one minimized and the other one back up so fast, and you have no idea that for the last 5 minutes they've been masturbating underneath the sheets.
Yeah, I mean, they're not playing Super Mario Brothers for 4 hours. It's a different world now. And like you said, and how great is it that you can go between shooting people and killing people and watching pornography? I mean, could you imagine a more destructive combination than that for a 14-year-old boy?
And so, how is that 14-year-old boy who's seeing full-grown women utterly naked doing obscene acts? How does he on the next day go back to school, David, and interact with a little 13-year-old?
She's gonna. I mean, and not only that. How does he interact when he's 21 with a woman he wants to marry?
Well,
she doesn't measure up, let alone that 13-year-old girl.
Right, but he doesn't even never gets to the 21 stage, David, because for the last 5 or 6 years interacting with the 13-year-old and the 14-year-old, it never worked out the way it did on the screen, and it always was awkward. He never pushed through it, and so he always found his female gratification through a screen. So now he's 28.
Yeah.
And he still hasn't had legitimate interaction with women.
Yeah, and he doesn't feel the need to because he gets that seeming gratification through a TV screen.
And sometimes I wonder if just success and affluence and the way that America's been blessed hasn't worked against all of those factors, because there was a time before America was booming and things. 13-year-olds, you had to go work in the fields, so you could do this little thing called eating later on, and you go out there and you put the seed in the ground and you get rid of the weeds and you walk behind a mule and you wait for the rain, and then 3 or 4 months later you keep doing that, and then you finally get and so we had a picture, an image in most males' minds of how life was. You worked hard and you waited.
Yeah, then we can talk about just daily functionality. When you talk about working all day, then all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's why there's a Sabbath, because I've been working hard for 6 days. Yeah. And then you also, because there were no 4-day weekends, you didn't get to call in sick and get 30 days of leave and 26 federal holidays and Donzas everywhere. There wasn't all of this time off. But how about the fact that You work all day. You spend time with family around a dinner table after everyone works, maybe to get that meal working, and then you clean up after supper, and then you might spend some time together around a fire or around a table, and then you go to bed at a reasonable time.
And do it all over again.
Yeah, and you take delight in it to some degree because you look outside, and I planted that garden, and I built this house, and I have to turn the crank on that engine to get it started, and so Ezekiel 16 is biting us in the rear end, where it says, "What is the sin of thy sister Sodom?" It doesn't say homosexuality; it says pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness. And so they had lots of time, lots of stuff, and they were full of themselves.
Yep.
And so they had affluence and plenty of time. And so what need do we have for a Sabbath? We've been Sabbathing for 5 half days by the time we get to Saturday. Right. And what need do we have to have devotions? I'm too tired from staying up too late. What were you doing? Well, I was FaceTiming with so-and-so, and I was perusing through this device, and I was shopping online for that, and before you know it, you're in bed for an hour, and you're on this device and that device, and your e-reader, and you're just busy, and then you come to school, you fall asleep. Okay. You can't have conversations because you've been listening to, you can't even drive in the car anymore without listening to hours of podcasts and e-books and your favorite radio station, and before you know it, you haven't had a silent moment with God all day, and you're going to sleep for 6 hours and get up in the morning and try it again. Good luck. Good luck.
And part of me just doesn't want to sound the alarm, because if you're a hardworking and you understand how things work, and you can go out there and you can fix stuff and you can do this, you're going to be at the top of the food chain pretty soon.
Yeah.
Because you got guys that they can do one thing, they can work on a computer, but they can't look at the engine of your car and figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, part of me says, don't tell anybody.
Yeah. Well, that was the bittersweet thing about getting in the Army. When I was 22 years old, I was late getting in the Army, and I weighed 250 pounds, and I haven't grown an inch since then. And my father-in-law told me, the Army will be easy for you. Here's what you do. You wear what you're supposed to wear, make sure you shave, show up at the right time in the right uniform, and just be a little early, and then do your job, and you will shine. He said other things, but he said, you will shine. I had no idea it was that easy, but sure enough, it is that easy in the United States Army.
It's not just the Army, Bill. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's wrap up this article. The charity campaign against living miserably, or CALM, was started in 2006. Well, let me back up. The sentence below the picture says, Zimbardo believes that excessive solitary use of video games and porn is seriously stunting boys' social development. And I would say that's an understatement. The charity Campaign Against Living Miserably, or CALM, was started in 2006 and has gained high profile in recent years for its effort to encourage men to discuss mental health problems and to bring down the male suicide rate. Zimbardo is famous for the 1971 Stanford prison experiment in which 24 students were asked to play the roles of guards and prisoners in mock prison at Stanford University. Intended to last 2 weeks, the experiment was abandoned after 6 days after the previously normal guards became extremely sadistic and prisoners became submissive and depressed. The experiment is believed to demonstrate the extreme impressibility and obedience of people when they are presented with a supporting ideology and power.
I'm not sure how that fits into the article.
No, it seems kind of added on there.
Yeah.
I think they're just trying to say who Zimbardo is.
Okay.
But maybe there's a connection there in the sense that if I'm in my own little world, I can be king.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's appealing. I don't know.
And that's why a lot of these kids who go into schools and shoot up the schools, these are kids who are spend a lot of time playing video games and by themselves, and they're alone. And so they don't have any, they've lost the sense of reality in the sense that they can walk into a school and start shooting people. Mm-hmm. Because they're alone. These are loner kids. The kid that shot up the school in Connecticut, he was a loner. He was by himself. And he played video games all day.
I've had multiple couples in the last 6 months of counseling. Multiple. Some married a long time, some married a few years, some married 1 year, all across the board. They've all communicated a disgust with their present intimacy because the pre-marriage intimacy was incredible. And now that they're married and they're actually doing life together, that doing life, like you said, Bill, changing diapers, doing laundry, washing dishes, doing more laundry, more dishes, got to go grocery shopping, the grass needs to be cut, the oil needs to be changed, the car needs to be vacuumed out, the roof is leaking. I mean, it never ends. Agreed?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and where do we fit this in? And then it's fit in, and it's quick, and it's not so great, and then life sucks. And there used to be a time when we really, and that's
At least in their mind, they can reach back and romanticize those times anyway.
of course, and create that
The good old days.
right
Yeah.
before they got married. You know, where they met in the backseat of the car, or they snuck upstairs in Daddy's room, or got a hotel together, all kinds of cool, romantic kind of things. And now that they're just living together and they just kind of fall to sleep at the end of a really crazy day with nothing happening, or worse yet, her telling him, I'm too tired, and he goes to bed pouting, or gets up and goes back to his old ways that he learned when he was 12. And then they wonder why we're not having great marriages. And then on top of that, God gets blamed. God gets blamed. Somehow because they prayed about it once or twice, God didn't do anything about it, and there's no recognition that our utter failure to obey God's way has legitimate consequences for an extended period of time.
Yeah, they've by going down a road early on, which they don't want to acknowledge, you know, they are now impacting their marriages so many years later. You know, and I've told this to people before. It's like, well, look how you guys got together. Look at your circumstances, and you think things are just going to go smoothly. You know, you're going to have to overcome a lot of stuff that you did back there to make it work over here, because that was not God.
It's like starting off in emotional debt.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, you've dug a hole so deep.
$20,000 worth of emotional debt.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and so many, I mean, I think you see this with women, they marry these guys and they have no idea how much emotional debt they're dragging behind them because they've been addicted to pornography, because they've indulged in these different things. And as men, it doesn't take much for that to just stick in your head.
Right.
You know, if you're exposed to this at an early age, right? And I grew up with a father who kept pornography in the house. So it's there. It's always there, and there are things that got lodged in my head at 13 that I can't get rid of now. You know, it is a struggle for these guys that live in this world because they've immersed themselves in something that's not real, and it's from the pit of hell, as you would say.
Yeah, it's always amazing when a woman and man, enter into a relationship while they're married. And they end up getting divorced and then married, and then she expects him to be faithful to him. You know, when the whole situation that started their relationship in the first place was extramarital.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I said to one, well, what was he like when y'all were dating? Well, he's lazy. And now you're surprised? Yeah. You're kind of wondering. But they don't seem to make the connection. They don't seem to make the connection. Bill, you opened the Word of God. Was there a reason?
Yeah, I was trying to find a verse that I was thinking of where Paul says here in Romans 7:4, "My brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit to God." Interesting, that word fruit there. "For when we were in the flesh, the motions of sin, the movement of sin, which were by the law, did work in our members to bring forth fruit to death." So we have this excitableness to do wrong simply by the fact that we have Adam in us, Adam our father in us. And there's something especially enticing about doing something that we're not allowed to do. And that is the whole point of that passage is, was it that man and this woman in this scenario where they had premarital sex and then marriage, was it that she was prettier? No, is it because she was forbidden? Was it because he was more handsome and more responsible? No, it's because he was forbidden. That is why it was better, it seems, before they were married, because they